What happens when an ordinary man with nothing to lose decides to take down the most powerful politician in his country? What would you do if you discovered evidence that could destroy someone who controls everything around you? Can one voice really silence decades of corruption? These questions haunted Marcus Rivera every single night as he walked through the marble corridors of power, invisible to those who shaped the fate of millions. This is the story of Marcus Rivera, a 42-year-old janitor who worked the graveyard shift at the state capitol building in Sacramento. For 15 long years, he had mopped floors, emptied overflowing trash cans, and cleaned the offices of politicians who made decisions affecting every aspect of American life. Marcus was a ghost in their world, just another faceless worker in the background of their self-important universe. They looked right through him as if he didn't exist, as if his presence was as insignificant as the dust he swept away each night. Every morning at exactly 6 a.m., Marcus would drive his beat-up 2008 Honda Civic through the wealthy neighborhoods surrounding the Capitol. He would pass million-dollar mansions with perfectly manicured lawns and luxury cars and circular driveways, then return to his modest two-bedroom apartment in East Sacramento. The contrast was a daily reminder of the vast gulf between those who made the rules and those who lived by them. His wife, Maria, worked exhausting double shifts as a registered nurse at Sacramento General Hospital, her hands cracked from constant hand sanitizing, her back aching from 12-hour days caring for patients who couldn't afford better health care. Their daughter, Sophia, was a junior at UC Davis, studying journalism with dreams of exposing corruption and holding powerful people accountable. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that his daughter wanted to do exactly what he was too afraid to attempt. Every month, they struggled to pay her tuition, often choosing between Sophia's education and fixing their car or replacing worn-out appliances. They were the embodiment of working-class America, people who played by every rule, paid every tax, and still found themselves falling further behind while politicians promised solutions that never came. Marcus had been watching and listening for years, his invisibility becoming an unexpected advantage. During those quiet hours between midnight and dawn, as he methodically cleaned the offices of senators and representatives, he had developed an almost supernatural awareness of the building's rhythms. He knew which offices stayed occupied late into the night, which politicians met in secret, and which conversations stopped abruptly when footsteps echoed in the hallways. His keen observational skills, honed by years of trying to remain unnoticed, had turned him into an accidental surveillance expert. But Marcus had been documenting more than just schedules and habits. Conversations that weren't meant for anyone's ears reached him regularly. Documents carelessly left on desks revealed information that would shock the public. Phone calls conducted in multiple languages, thinking that a simple janitor couldn't possibly understand, exposed networks of influence that stretched across international borders. Marcus spoke fluent Spanish and adequate Portuguese, skills acquired during his childhood in East LA that these arrogant politicians never suspected he possessed. Senator Richard Blackwood was fundamentally different from the other politicians Marcus encountered. While most elected officials at least maintained a facade of caring about appearances when staff was present, Blackwood treated Marcus with a level of contempt that was breathtaking in its audacity. He would continue highly sensitive phone conversations even when Marcus was directly beside his desk, emptying his gold-plated wastebasket. He discussed bribes, threatened political opponents, and coordinated cover-ups as if the janitor was nothing more than an automated cleaning robot. This monumental arrogance would ultimately become Blackwood's most catastrophic mistake. Senator Richard Blackwood had occupied his position for 28 years, ascending to become chairman of the Senate Infrastructure Committee with control over federal highway funding that exceeded $40 billion annually. His carefully crafted public image showed a man of the people who understood working-class struggles. His campaign commercials featured him wearing hard hats at construction sites, shaking calloused hands with road workers, and visiting small towns across California while promising better infrastructure and economic development for hard-working families. His speeches were filled with populist rhetoric about fighting for the forgotten Americans who built the highways and bridges that kept the country moving. The reality behind the carefully constructed public persona was staggeringly different. Blackwood's corner office on the building's top floor was a testament to luxury that rivaled European palaces. Persian rugs worth more than most people's annual salaries covered imported Italian marble floors. His massive mahogany desk, custom-built by craftsmen in England, was larger than Marcus's entire kitchen. Crystal decanters filled with whiskey that cost thousands per bottle sat next to signed photographs with foreign dictators and arms dealers. The walls displayed oil paintings of American presidents, as if Blackwood saw himself as their equal rather than their servant. Blackwood owned a portfolio of properties that would make real estate moguls envious. His primary residence was a sprawling estate in Napa Valley, complete with a private vineyard, horse stables, and a helicopter landing pad. His beach house in Malibu featured panoramic ocean views and a private dock for his 60-foot yacht. A third property in Aspen provided ski-in, ski-out access to exclusive slopes where he entertained foreign businessmen and corrupt officials from other states. His fleet of vehicles included a Bentley Continental for formal occasions, a Ferrari for weekend drives, and a modified Escalade with bulletproof glass and run-flat tires for security purposes. His wife, Veronica, was equally ostentatious in her displays of ill-gotten wealth. She wore jewelry collections that museums would envy, including a necklace featuring diamonds that had allegedly been stolen from a deposed South American dictator. Her closets contained thousands of designer dresses, many worn only once to charity galas where she posed as a philanthropist, while her husband stole money meant for public works projects. Their children attended exclusive boarding schools in Switzerland that cost more per year than most families earned, insulated from the consequences of their father's crimes by oceans and trust funds. Marcus first noticed something fundamentally wrong on a cold Tuesday night in late October. The building was unusually quiet, with most staff having left hours earlier due to a water main break that had flooded the basement parking garage. Marcus was methodically cleaning Blackwood's office when the senator's private phone rang with a distinctive classical music ringtone that Marcus had learned meant serious business. The conversation that followed would forever change Marcus's understanding of just how deep corruption could penetrate American democracy. The caller was someone Blackwood addressed respectfully as Tony, and their discussion immediately focused on percentages, kickbacks, and which construction companies would receive the next round of federal highway contracts worth over $2 billion. But this wasn't simply a matter of political favoritism or campaign contributions. Blackwood was operating a sophisticated criminal enterprise that systematically defrauded American taxpayers while endangering their safety through substandard construction and delayed maintenance projects. Marcus continued his cleaning routine, his movements becoming almost automatic as his complete attention focused on absorbing every detail of the conversation. Blackwood discussed specific bank account numbers in the Cayman Islands, shell companies registered in Delaware, and a complex money laundering operation that converted stolen taxpayer funds into untraceable cryptocurrency. The senator spoke casually about bribes exceeding $10 million as if discussing grocery purchases, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who believed himself completely above the law. Over the following weeks, Marcus began approaching his job with the dedication of an undercover investigative journalist. He started carrying a small digital audio recorder that Sophia had given him the previous Christmas for recording shopping lists and family reminders. The device was so small it could be completely concealed in his palm, and Marcus discovered he could capture surprisingly clear audio by positioning himself strategically near doorways or behind furniture while appearing to focus intently on his custodial duties. The conversations Marcus recorded revealed a criminal enterprise that operated with shocking boldness and sophistication. Blackwood wasn't merely accepting bribes from construction companies seeking government contracts. He was orchestrating an entire shadow economy where public infrastructure funding was systematically stolen through a network of shell companies, corrupt subcontractors, and complicit government officials. Construction companies would pay millions in consulting fees to firms that existed only on paper, and in return, they would receive no-bid contracts worth hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars. But the scheme was even more sinister than simple theft. Many of these construction companies cut corners on materials and labor to maximize profits, knowing that Blackwood's network would prevent proper inspections and safety oversight. Roads were built with substandard asphalt that would deteriorate within months rather than lasting decades as intended. Bridges received cosmetic improvements while underlying structural problems remained unaddressed. School construction projects used materials that failed basic safety standards, putting children at risk every day they attended classes in these buildings. Marcus began to understand that every pothole that destroyed a family's car tires, every bridge collapse that killed innocent commuters, every school ceiling that collapsed and injured students could be traced back to this web of corruption. Blackwood wasn't just stealing money intended for public works. He was literally trading American lives for personal profit, creating a legacy of infrastructure failure that would endanger citizens for generations. The breakthrough that would ultimately bring down the entire criminal enterprise came on a frigid November evening, when an early winter storm had knocked out power to several blocks surrounding the Capitol building. Emergency generators kept essential systems running, but the building's sophisticated security and surveillance systems were operating on backup power with reduced functionality. Blackwood had arrived for what his calendar described as a strategic planning session. But Marcus could see through the office windows that this was actually a meeting with several individuals who definitely weren't legitimate government officials. When Blackwood stepped out of his office for what he loudly announced would be a brief strategic consultation in the conference room, Marcus knew this was likely his only opportunity to access the senator's personal computer. His hands trembling with nervous energy and the weight of potential consequences, Marcus approached the massive mahogany desk where Blackwood's laptop sat open and unlocked. The screen displayed a complex spreadsheet tracking payments, bank account transfers, and project timelines that clearly outlined the entire corruption scheme. Marcus pulled out a high-capacity USB drive that Sophia had helped him purchase, claiming he needed it for storing family photos and important documents. His heart hammered against his ribs as he navigated through Blackwood's files, copying everything that seemed remotely relevant to the corruption investigation. Bank statements from accounts in multiple countries, email correspondences with co-conspirators, detailed contract agreements with shell companies, incorporation documents for fake businesses, and financial records showing the flow of stolen taxpayer money through an intricate laundering operation. The files revealed the staggering scope of Blackwood's criminal enterprise. Over his 28-year political career, he had systematically stolen more than $200 million through various schemes involving infrastructure contracts, military procurement deals, and foreign aid programs. But the monetary theft was only part of the story. The documents showed how his corruption had directly contributed to infrastructure failures that had killed dozens of people and injured hundreds more over the past decade. As footsteps echoed ominously in the marble hallway outside, Marcus's pulse accelerated to dangerous levels as he watched the final files transfer to his USB drive. The copying process seemed to take an eternity, each second stretching into what felt like hours as he listened for any indication that Blackwood was returning. Marcus had calculated that he needed at least 15 minutes to copy everything important, but he had been working for nearly 20 minutes and could hear voices approaching from the conference room. With only seconds to spare, Marcus safely ejected the USB drive and quickly closed all the computer programs, ensuring that the screen displayed exactly what it had shown when he first approached the desk. He grabbed his mop and began vigorously cleaning the marble floor near the office entrance, his movements slightly exaggerated by adrenaline but hopefully appearing normal to anyone entering the room. Blackwood returned to his office with two men Marcus didn't recognize, their expensive suits and suspicious behavior suggesting they were definitely not legitimate government officials. The senator reeked of expensive whiskey and imported cigars, his voice slightly slurred as he dismissed Marcus with a contemptuous wave that barely acknowledged his human existence. The janitor continued methodically cleaning, the USB drive containing enough evidence to destroy Blackwood's empire burning like a radioactive coal in his uniform pocket. That night, Marcus experienced the most sleepless and anxiety-ridden hours of his entire life. He sat at his small kitchen table under the dim illumination of a single fluorescent bulb, staring at the USB drive as if it contained nuclear launch codes. The weight of what he had discovered pressed down on him with crushing intensity. This wasn't simply evidence of political corruption or financial impropriety. These documents proved that Senator Blackwood was directly responsible for American deaths through his systematic sabotage of critical infrastructure projects. When Maria found him at the kitchen table the next morning, still wearing his work uniform and staring blankly at the USB drive, she immediately knew something catastrophic had happened. Marcus had always been able to compartmentalize his work and home life, never bringing the stress of his job into their modest apartment. But seeing her husband in this state of obvious psychological distress, she sat down and gently asked him to explain what was wrong. Marcus told her everything about the conversations he had overheard, the patterns of corruption he had observed, and finally about the files he had copied from Blackwood's computer. As he described the evidence of systematic theft and the infrastructure failures that had cost American lives, Maria's expression transformed from concern to horror to righteous anger. She was a healthcare professional who had dedicated her life to saving lives, and learning that a corrupt politician was literally killing people for profit triggered a level of moral outrage that surprised them both. But Maria was also terrified for her family's safety. Blackwood wasn't just a corrupt politician with financial resources. The documents Marcus had copied revealed connections to organized crime figures, foreign intelligence operatives, and domestic terrorists who would kill without hesitation to protect their criminal enterprise. These weren't people who would simply fire Marcus and forget about him. They were individuals who made problems disappear permanently, along with anyone who created those problems. As they sat together at their worn kitchen table, discussing the most important decision of their lives, Maria asked the question that would ultimately determine their course of action. "Marcus, if we don't expose this monster, how many more people will die because of his greed? How many families will suffer because roads collapse, bridges fail, or schools are built with materials that poison children? How can we live with ourselves knowing we had the power to stop this and chose our own safety instead?" Marcus looked at his wife with tears forming in his eyes, understanding that she was absolutely right, but also terrified of what standing up to Blackwood might cost their family. They both knew the statistics about whistleblowers who challenged powerful political figures. Many faced financial ruin through endless legal battles. Others experienced harassment, threats, and professional blacklisting that destroyed their careers and their families' futures. Some simply disappeared entirely, their cases remaining unsolved for decades. But Maria continued speaking, her voice gaining strength as she articulated what they both knew was morally correct. Every pothole that destroys someone's car and costs them money they can't afford, every bridge that remains dangerous because maintenance money was stolen, every school that makes children sick because Blackwood used our tax money to buy another mansion, all of that continues until someone with courage decides to stop him. Marcus realized she was absolutely correct. Every day they delayed action meant more infrastructure failures, more wasted taxpayer money, and potentially more deaths. Blackwood's corruption wasn't a victimless white-collar crime. It was a systematic assault on American citizens who trusted their government to provide safe roads, secure bridges, and properly constructed public buildings. The senator was literally trading American lives for personal luxury, and only someone with access to irrefutable evidence could stop him. The next several weeks were simultaneously the most terrifying and empowering period of Marcus's entire life. He couldn't contact traditional law enforcement because Blackwood's network included corrupt police commissioners, district attorneys, and federal agents who would warn the senator about any investigation. He couldn't approach mainstream media outlets because many were either owned by Blackwood's wealthy allies or too intimidated by his legal team to risk investigative reporting that might result in expensive lawsuits. Marcus realized that his only viable option was bypassing traditional power structures entirely and going directly to the American people through social media platforms that couldn't be controlled or censored by corrupt officials. The Internet had democratized information distribution, giving ordinary citizens the ability to expose corruption without depending on institutions that might be compromised or intimidated. Working late into the night after his shifts, Marcus began organizing the evidence in a format that would be accessible to ordinary Americans rather than lawyers or investigators. He created simple charts showing how taxpayer money flowed from federal accounts into shell companies and eventually into Blackwood's personal accounts. He prepared audio recordings with clear transcripts that explained exactly what conversations revealed about the corruption scheme. Most importantly, he compiled photographic evidence contrasting Blackwood's luxury lifestyle with the infrastructure failures his corruption had caused. On a rainy Tuesday morning in December, exactly 2 months after he first copied files from Blackwood's computer, Marcus uploaded everything to multiple social media platforms simultaneously. He created detailed posts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, ensuring that the evidence would be impossible to completely suppress even if individual platforms tried to remove content under pressure from Blackwood's legal team. The evidence package Marcus released was devastating in its comprehensiveness and clarity. Bank records showed exact amounts stolen from specific infrastructure projects. Audio recordings captured Blackwood personally coordinating bribery schemes and discussing how to avoid federal investigators. Email chains revealed the senator's contempt for American citizens whose tax money he was stealing. Photographs documented his luxury properties, expensive vehicles, and lavish lifestyle that would be impossible to afford on a government salary. But Marcus didn't simply present dry financial documents and legal evidence. He created powerful visual contrasts that made the corruption personally relevant to ordinary Americans. Side-by-side photographs showed Blackwood's million-dollar wine cellar next to images of crumbling schools in his district where children attended classes in buildings with lead paint and asbestos insulation. Pictures of his 60-foot yacht were paired with photographs of bridges that had been condemned as structurally unsafe but remained open to traffic because maintenance funds had been stolen. Within hours of Marcus's evidence release, #Blackwood Files became the top trending topic on every major social media platform. The story spread with viral intensity as Americans shared, commented, and expressed their outrage about systematic corruption that had directly impacted their daily lives. News outlets that had initially ignored or minimized the story found themselves forced to provide comprehensive coverage as public demand for information reached unprecedented levels. Television networks played Marcus's audio recordings continuously throughout the day, with legal experts explaining exactly how each conversation demonstrated specific federal crimes. Radio stations conducted call-in segments where listeners shared their own experiences with infrastructure failures in their communities, connecting local problems to Blackwood's systematic theft of maintenance and construction funding. Newspapers published detailed investigations that expanded on Marcus's evidence, revealing additional corruption in other states where similar schemes might be operating. But Senator Blackwood had not survived nearly 3 decades in politics without developing sophisticated damage control capabilities. Within 24 hours of the evidence release, his crisis management team launched a coordinated counterattack designed to discredit the allegations and destroy whoever had exposed his criminal enterprise. His legal team, consisting of former federal prosecutors and Supreme Court clerks, immediately threatened massive lawsuits against anyone sharing or discussing the leaked information. Blackwood's media allies began broadcasting carefully crafted narratives suggesting that the evidence was fabricated by foreign intelligence services trying to destabilize American democracy. They claimed that the audio recordings were created using advanced artificial intelligence technology that could perfectly mimic anyone's voice. They argued that the financial documents were forgeries designed to frame an innocent public servant who had dedicated his life to serving American families. The senator held an emergency press conference at the Capitol building. standing behind a podium flanked by American flags and surrounded by political allies who vouched for his character and integrity. His performance was masterful, combining righteous indignation with wounded dignity as he portrayed himself as the victim of a sophisticated smear campaign designed to destroy his decades of public service. Blackwood's speech was carefully calculated to exploit partisan divisions and create doubt about the evidence's authenticity. He claimed that unnamed deep state operatives were targeting him because of his efforts to drain corruption from Washington and return power to ordinary Americans. He promised to find whoever was responsible for these malicious fabrications and ensure they faced the full consequences of their crimes against democracy. Marcus watched the press conference from his living room, his wife and daughter beside him on their worn couch that had been purchased secondhand nearly a decade earlier. His hands trembled as he listened to Blackwood's lies, knowing that the senator's investigators were probably already working to identify the source of the leaks. Sophisticated forensic techniques could potentially trace the evidence back to him, and once they discovered his identity, his family would face threats and dangers he couldn't even imagine. But something unexpected and powerful began happening across the country. The story wasn't dying down or being successfully discredited as Blackwood had anticipated. Instead, it was gaining momentum and credibility as more evidence emerged and additional witnesses found the courage to speak out. Other government employees who had observed suspicious activities began sharing their own experiences. Construction workers who had been fired for refusing to use substandard materials came forward with first-hand accounts of corruption on federal projects. Engineers who had been silenced when they tried to report safety violations started providing technical documentation, proving that Blackwood's preferred contractors consistently delivered substandard work that endangered public safety. Accounting professionals from various government agencies revealed how budget allocations were manipulated to hide the theft of infrastructure funding. Even some of Blackwood's own staff members, protected by whistleblower laws and motivated by conscience, began cooperating with investigators who were finally free to pursue the case. The evidence became overwhelming and impossible to dismiss as fabrication or political theater. Federal investigators, facing unprecedented public pressure and armed with concrete evidence of systematic corruption, had no choice but to launch a formal investigation into Blackwood's criminal enterprise. The FBI obtained warrants to raid the senator's offices, his multiple residences, and the headquarters of shell companies he used to launder stolen taxpayer money. The raids were conducted with military-style precision and overwhelming force, reflecting the seriousness of the charges and the potential for Blackwood's associates to destroy evidence or flee the country. Television news helicopters captured footage of federal agents carrying boxes of documents, computer equipment, and financial records from properties across multiple states. The images of FBI agents searching Blackwood's luxury mansions while he sat in a federal detention center created a powerful visual representation of justice finally catching up with corruption. 2 weeks after Marcus first uploaded the evidence that started this avalanche of accountability, Senator Richard Blackwood was arrested on 47 federal charges including bribery, money laundering, fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and treason. The man who had seemed completely untouchable, who had treated ordinary Americans like Marcus as if they were invisible and worthless, was led away in handcuffs while news cameras captured every moment of his humiliation and downfall. But the real victory for American democracy came during Blackwood's perp walk from the federal courthouse where he had been formally charged. As he was escorted by federal marshals through a crowd of protesters and reporters, the gathering included construction workers whose jobs had been eliminated when honest companies lost contracts to Blackwood's corrupt associates. Teachers from schools that had been built with substandard materials were present, along with nurses like Maria who treated patients injured in infrastructure failures caused by the senator's greed. Marcus was present in that crowd, still anonymous to the world but no longer invisible to himself. He stood among hundreds of ordinary Americans whose lives had been damaged by Blackwood's systematic corruption, watching as the man who had stolen their tax money and endangered their safety was finally held accountable for his crimes. The senator who had once discussed million-dollar bribes as casually as ordering lunch was now just another criminal defendant facing decades in federal prison. The federal investigation that Marcus had triggered revealed that Blackwood's corruption was even more extensive and destructive than initially apparent. Over his 28-year political career, forensic accountants determined that he had stolen more than $400 million through various schemes involving infrastructure contracts, military procurement fraud, and international aid embezzlement. But the financial theft was only part of his criminal legacy. Engineering investigations commissioned by federal prosecutors proved that Blackwood's corruption had directly contributed to at least 37 deaths and more than 200 serious injuries over the past 15 years. Bridge collapses that killed commuters, school building failures that injured students, and highway construction defects that caused fatal accidents could all be traced back to his systematic sabotage of safety inspections and quality control processes. The trials that followed Blackwood's arrest exposed a criminal network that included dozens of co-conspirators across multiple states and several foreign countries. Construction company executives, government officials, banking professionals, and organized crime figures were all arrested and prosecuted for their roles in the massive fraud scheme. Shell companies were dissolved, millions in stolen assets were recovered, and for the first time in decades, infrastructure contracts were awarded based on merit and competitive bidding rather than corruption and political influence. Blackwood himself received a life sentence without possibility of parole, effectively ensuring that he would die in federal prison. During his sentencing hearing, the judge specifically noted that his crimes went far beyond financial fraud and represented a systematic betrayal of the American people who had trusted him to protect their safety and wisely spend their tax money. The former senator, who had once owned multiple mansions and traveled in private jets, would spend his remaining years in a concrete cell measuring 6 feet by 8 feet. Marcus never publicly revealed that he was the source of the evidence that brought down Senator Blackwood and exposed the entire criminal network. He continued working his night shift at the Capitol building, now cleaning the offices of new representatives who understood they were being observed by someone they couldn't see, but who possessed the power to expose any corruption they might consider. His invisibility, once a source of humiliation, had become a powerful tool for maintaining government accountability. Sophia graduated from UC Davis with highest honors, her education funded by a scholarship program created using recovered assets from Blackwood's criminal enterprise. She became an investigative journalist specializing in political corruption, inspired by the unknown whistleblower who had demonstrated that ordinary citizens could successfully challenge even the most powerful corrupt officials. She never learned that her own father was the hero whose courage had changed American politics forever. The story of the anonymous janitor who brought down Senator Blackwood became legendary among government employees and political reformers. Security protocols were enhanced, surveillance systems were upgraded, and politicians became significantly more cautious about their conversations and digital communications. They had learned that someone was always watching, always listening, and always prepared to expose corruption regardless of how powerful the perpetrators believed themselves to be. Marcus's actions created ripple effects that extended far beyond bringing down one corrupt senator and his criminal network. Whistleblowers in other states were inspired to come forward with evidence of similar corruption schemes, leading to investigations and prosecutions that cleaned up government contracting processes nationwide. The Blackwood files became a template for exposing political corruption, demonstrating how ordinary citizens could effectively challenge entrenched power structures using social media and strategic evidence presentation. Infrastructure projects that had been delayed or compromised by Blackwood's interference were finally completed according to proper engineering standards. Roads were repaired using appropriate materials and construction techniques that would last for decades rather than failing within months. Bridges received necessary structural improvements that eliminated safety hazards that had threatened commuters for years. Schools were renovated or rebuilt using materials that met all health and safety requirements, ensuring that children could learn in environments that wouldn't endanger their health. Most importantly, American citizens realized that they didn't have to passively accept corruption as an inevitable aspect of political life. One ordinary man with a mop, a USB drive, and extraordinary courage had proven that even the most powerful officials could be held accountable when citizens decided to act on their principles rather than their fears. On the 5th anniversary of Blackwood's arrest, Marcus drove his Honda Civic along a newly constructed highway that the senator's corruption had delayed for over a decade. The smooth pavement, properly engineered bridges, and clearly marked lanes represented far more than improved transportation infrastructure. They were tangible proof that truth could triumph over deception, that justice could prevail over corruption, and that ordinary people possessed the power to create extraordinary change when they found the courage to act. His daughter called that evening to share news about her latest investigation into municipal corruption in Los Angeles, expressing gratitude for the mysterious Capitol building whistleblower who had inspired her career choice. Marcus listened with pride as Sophia described her plans to expose officials who were stealing money meant for homeless services, knowing that his example had motivated her to dedicate her professional life to holding powerful people accountable for their actions. As he prepared for another night shift at the Capitol, Marcus reflected on the profound changes that had occurred since that October evening when he first overheard Blackwood coordinating a multi-million-dollar bribery scheme. The building's architecture remained unchanged, the office layouts were identical, and his custodial responsibilities hadn't varied. But everything that truly mattered was completely different. The politicians who now occupied those offices understood they were working in an environment where corruption would be exposed and prosecuted regardless of their political connections or financial resources. They spoke more carefully during phone calls, acted more ethically in their business dealings, and treated even custodial staff with respect and dignity. Political power had been reminded of its limitations, and government corruption had learned that it couldn't hide forever from citizens who demanded honesty and accountability. Marcus had discovered the most fundamental truth about American democracy, that ultimate authority belongs to the people, not to their elected representatives, and sometimes it requires just one person with courage and evidence to remind everyone of that essential principle. His story proved that heroism doesn't require special training, extraordinary resources, or political connections. It only requires an ordinary person who decides that doing what's right is more important than staying safe. Never underestimate the power of an ordinary person who decides to do something extraordinary. In a world where corruption often seems unstoppable and untouchable, remember Marcus Rivera and his mop bucket revolution. Remember that truth is more powerful than money, that justice is stronger than political influence, and that the most important battles for American democracy are sometimes fought not by politicians or professional activists, but by invisible citizens who simply decide they've had enough of being ignored and exploited. If this story of courage, justice, and ordinary heroism inspired you, if you believe that truth can triumph over corruption and that one person really can make a difference, then help spread this vital message. Subscribe to top_life_stories for more incredible tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things to make the world better. Because these stories aren't just entertainment or inspiration. They're reminders of the power we all possess when we choose to use it for justice instead of staying silent in the face of corruption.